This is the Beaver Banter Podcast. I'm CJ Baumgartner, and that's Ian Rivers. In the middle is our guy, Jared Rubado, the Bemidji Pioneer sports editor, and we are ringing in 2025 as we have a lot to talk about. We're going to get caught up on all things Bemidji State hockey. So, Jared, once again, welcome back onto the show.
Thanks, guys. Fun. The first guest of 2025.
You are officially the first, and the best part is that in 2025, the Bemidji State University men's hockey program has not lost a game yet.
Yeah, no, they're as long as I've been in Bemidji, they've been a second half team. So that's something for fans to hang their hat on, I guess.
Just barely squeaking that one in, by the way, after the very quick delay. I'm surprised that it didn't take longer in last night's game. I say as we're recording on January 1st, the glass breaking in the game against Duluth. And
yeah,
I mean, I was watching the game on my phone at a family gathering, and I missed a solid chunk of the game because I just assumed that it wasn't going to come back on for at least another 30 minutes.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Shout out to the Stanford Center crew.
Yeah, exactly.
It was funny because I was, once it happened, I was sitting next to Matt Wellens at the Duluth News Tribune, and we both kind of looked at each other like, oh my God, we're gonna be here forever now. Not that we don't want to be at the rink, but it's more like he's on deadline. You know, there's a lot going on, right? It's a process, right? You want to get in and you want to get out. And we looked at each other like we're gonna be here forever. And when they like started like taking the forklift off the ice, we're like, are they done? Like, it took like 10 minutes. Like, what? So yeah, no, credit to the Stanford Center crew because that's the quickest I've ever seen the glass being changed. I've only seen it 2 other times, and those were on TV. So yeah, no, that was swift work.
It's officially a Jared Rubado world record. So that's
the second time. The second time I've seen that happen in the Sanford Center. I was at the game. I think it was the 2016-17 season when a slap shot from Zach Whitecloud hit the glass behind the net and shattered it. It didn't fall and break, but it broke the pane of glass. So it's, you can't play with it in that condition. So
yeah,
I had to change it out.
That got brought up last night too because I turned around to Tyler Christensen, the SID. I was like, "Has this ever happened before?" He's like, "Oh yeah, 2017. Zach Whitecloud did it on a shot," and I'm like,
"Yeah,
okay, cool."
Zach Whitecloud, I feel like would be the guy to have it do it. NHL or Stanley Cup champion for whatever reason. Ian, I was like before you said it, I was like, is he going to say Jay Dickman? Is it going to be a Jay Dickman slap shot? Because that for whatever reason that name just always stuck out.
Dickman famously didn't take very many slap shots. He was just a big body there that was, cleaning up goal front scrums.
Doesn't matter. I just feel like he would have been the guy.
Polkamp would have been another candidate.
Polkamp.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to remember players off the top of my head from those teams. Adam Brady, maybe when you throw in there. Sure. Ian, who's a pull? You got a pull?
I'll go with Justin Beaudry.
Oh, I like that. I like that.
Well pull out.
You could throw out Fitzgerald if you wanted, maybe
any of the 3. Yeah.
Any of the 3. Which one? Yes. There's a lot you could pull out. So there we go. It's the name who's your good pull, and it's Packers fans going Jordy Nelson. So we're trying to distract from the fact of that, with the broken glass and with some of the other stuff, it's not been a great month for Bemidji State men's hockey. And Jared, you've been at most of the games. You've had a chance to talk with guys and just kind of be around there. First off, what's kind of your prognosis? What do you think has kind of been the reason for the struggles, and kind of what's a vibe check around that locker room and when you've been kind of interacting with guys and just what you've seen on the ice?
Yeah, it's a good question because I think you kind of have to look at the first half of the season into thirds, right? Like you start with that one game against Duluth, you get a home and home against St. Cloud, and then you get an early bye, go on the road to Ferris, right? Like that's kind of that first third of those games where you're still trying to figure out, okay, what pieces are trying to work best with the right pieces, what systems are, we going to run here, matchup wise, right? There's a lot to figure out in a short amount of time, and not the best teams to try and figure that out against, right? Like Duluth is a kind of an unknown team in October with the amount of freshmen they have, and you're putting up a very experienced group and just saying, go do it. Like, just see what happens. That's what Sartori said this past week on Monday. He's like, yeah, in October, like, you only get a few hours to work with these guys going into that game. Just let the hockey sense take over and see what happens. And that kind of trickles into that St. Cloud series, which, I think those first 3 games were a really good showing despite the 1-2 record, because you beat Duluth in overtime. You deserve better against St. Cloud on the road. You didn't deserve better against St. Cloud at home, but it's at least kind of like, okay, yes, we're 1-2, but you're looking in the right direction. So that's the vibe I got out of them at that point. You go into Ferris, you drop 1 because it's Ferris, and for some reason Bemidji State likes to lose at Ferris. You rebound with a win there, and then you kind of get to go back into that second third, right? And that second third is the gauntlet. You start with Minnesota State, which you split with them. Then you go to Augustana. It's your first kind of like taste of going to Augustana. Still a little bit of unfamiliarity there. You look at the schedule that Bemidji State plays. Augustana is the most unfamiliar team they play on their schedule. They play Duluth every year. St. Cloud, North Dakota. Minnesota is kind of in that category too, but they play them in exhibitions the past 2 years. And they've only had 2 games against Augustana, and they were both in one weekend last year. So Augustana, an unfamiliar opponent, right? And so then you come back, you get that, the home series against St. Thomas, right? And you take care of business there. Then you got, I think it was the Gophers, then St. Thomas, then North Dakota, whatever. Then you got North Dakota and Minnesota, and that is a gauntlet of a stretch. And everybody knew it. When the schedule came out, everybody knew that month of November was going to be a dogfight. And they came out on the better end of that dogfight. Like, that was a insanely impressive month. Like, yeah, it was a 500 month, right? But you beat North Dakota, you take 5 points out of St. Thomas, you beat Minnesota, you beat Minnesota State, one of the only teams in the country that's been able to say they've beaten Minnesota State this year. And what's your reward for getting out of that month? Oh, have fun at Taffy Apple playing a first place team and making that road trip up to Sault Ste. Marie. It's a tough road trip, and it's a tough team to play against. You split there, you come home and play Michigan Tech, and by the time you get – and so Lake State starts that last third, right? That last third ended last night. But you look for maybe a little bit of reprieve in the schedule, and you don't get any. You come back, you play Michigan Tech. By that point, I got the sense that these players are exhausted. They're tired. They need a break. They needed maybe a bye week in there. They needed something, right? I think that goal they gave up at the end of regulation on Friday night against Michigan Tech was kind of the backbreaker for them. Like the straw that broke the camel's back in terms of like, all right, this isn't going the way we want. Obviously, they pick up the extra point in the shootout. They take a 2-0 lead. They take a 3-2 lead, the 4-3 lead the following night. But then it just kind of, your bucket wasn't big enough to hold that much water. And it all kind of spilled out in that third period against Michigan Tech. And one of my favorite Tom Sartori quotes, I asked him, I was like, in the week leading up to that Michigan Tech series, he was like, yep, this series you play right before you go into Christmas break, it can change a lot of things, because you're either going into break feeling really good about yourself, or you're either going into break with that sour taste in your mouth. So when I asked him on Saturday after they gave up 6 goals in the third period, it's like, is it at all motivating for these guys to go into break being like, I want to get back on the ice and get rid of that taste in my mouth? One of my favorite quotes he gave me, he's like, yeah, these guys just, I don't want them thinking about hockey for a while. It's just ironic for a hockey coach to say, right? But it's true. It was a gauntlet of a first half. So, and then you go to last night, right? First period was pretty even for about the first 15 minutes. Then the glass breaks. McCauley gets one of the worst boarding penalties I've seen in my entire life. I've never seen a boarding call where a guy gets hit in the chest, but that's Dominic James gets hit in the chest. His skate breaks the glass, and McCauley's in the box for 2 minutes. As his penalty expires, Shagabe scores to take a 1-0 lead, and the ice tilted. The ice tilted in Duluth's favor. They absolutely dominated the last 5 minutes and took that 1-0 lead. But Second period, they started to get their legs back a little bit, tie the game, take it 2-2 going into the third. And the third period was just it was probably one of the more entertaining periods I've seen this year out of, from a fan watching perspective, right? Like Duluth had tons of good chances. Bemidji State had so many good chances. I mean, they controlled that third period for a lot of it too. And it was just a hockey period. I mean, Duluth got a fortunate break to go up 3-2. They get another one when I can't remember who broke their stick, but it leads to an odd man rush, and Harper Benz scores to make it 4-2, and that's the way it goes. And Casper Magnuson was inches away from tying the game. Riley Funk, first period, he had a really good shot on a 2-on-1 rush, and Clayton Knapp, right off the edge of the blocker. Brent Sizik has it in his photo gallery from last night, and it was literally half of the puck hits Knapp's blocker to prevent Bemidji State from going up 1-0. Like last night truly, solidified that game of inches theory that people like to place on sports. So I don't put much weight into a loss last night. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, right? Bemidji State's not going to be a pairwise team this year. Neither is Minnesota Duluth. It's a good team to play coming out of a 10-day break for Bemidji State, where, you obviously you get the exhibition on Friday too, but with a lot of guys who are probably looking to just find their legs back and get back in the swing of things, like Duluth's a pretty good team to do that against because they have a ton of talent. Duluth puts it together for some stretches and they don't for others. And it's a chance for you to say, okay, this is a time where we can learn how to be opportunistic. We can learn how to, defend against Duluth when they play those coherent stretches. And loss, but it was in a lot of ways, I got the vibe that it was a loss they didn't mind taking just because of how they finished the game, how they bounced back after that first period. And I think they're very, very much looking forward to the second half and trying to kind of repeat what they did last year.
Yeah, and it's been something that we've talked about on this show. We don't know what to make of this season, right? Because it feels like you're in a similar spot overall to where you were last year, but it's not coming in the conference. And unfortunately, the out of conference wins, as great as they've been, haven't put you in a position where now you are a pairwise team, like you just said. So it feels a bit more frustrating because now your one avenue that you have into the big dance is you're a little bit behind the 8 ball compared to even where you were last year. And we talked about it a couple of weeks ago, how, this team isn't that far off of their points pace. They are a little bit now because last year they entered Christmas break sweeping Bowling Green, and this was a 2-point effort against Michigan Tech. But there wasn't a team last year like Minnesota State who was playing so on fire that they were kind of taking control of the CCHA. And Augustana, of course, is sitting there at 67% as well. So that's where you feel like you're a little bit behind the 8 ball. And of course, you mentioned the fact that it's been a pretty tough schedule, even in conference. I mean, you look at the 4 weekends that are coming up out of the break here, and it's 4 teams that are at the bottom of the standings. None of these teams have home ice right now that Bemidji State will be playing coming out of this break. It's a really good opportunity to make up some of that ground, and hopefully this time off can help with that.
Yeah, I also think, like, when you talk about being behind the 8 ball, like Bemidji State, in some respects they are, right? I mean, they go into Christmas last year in first place, and this year they're going in 6th place. But it's a little bit of a misleading 6th place, right? Because it is by points percentage.
Yeah.
And
they're 500.
The common thought is that if you have a 50% points percentage or better, you're most likely in a position to have a home playoff series. And right now they are 2 spots out of having a home playoff series with a 50% points percentage. So that's a little misleading in some ways, but I think also last year was maybe a bit of a misleading first place too, where they're in first place. They also played more games than half of the teams in the CCHA at the break last year. And I think there were a lot of teams also still trying to figure themselves out in a way too, including Bemidji State. I think the league as a whole is better this year. You're not seeing as many splits as you did last year. At least that's not what it feels like, right? Like Minnesota State's taking care of business every weekend. you have a Northern Michigan and a Ferris State that's getting killed every single weekend, just handing out points to everybody. And when you're playing in a league that has more parity in that kind of top 7 this year compared to last year, where there was a ton of parity 1 through 8, but the parity wasn't good parity. It was a collection of pretty underwhelming teams just beating the hell out of each other. I mean, that's what it felt like every week, where now it's like, okay, you have an actual tournament team in Minnesota State, one of the more underrated teams in the country in Augustana. Michigan Tech just looks like, they only have like a line and a half right now, but that line and a half is pretty good. They found goaltending out of nowhere in Malahi, and so then you have Lake State. Did anybody really think Lake State was going to have a 750 points percentage going into Christmas? I don't know what it is off the top of my head, but it's around 750. No. Flip side, right? Like, everybody kind of thought St. Thomas would be in that mix, and they're sitting in second to last right now, or third to last. And so it's weird. Like, when you say you're trying, Bemidji State's trying to figure themselves out, I do agree with that. I also think there's only 3 teams that have kind of figured out what they are right now in the CCHA. It's Minnesota State, it's Ferris State, and it's Northern Michigan, for completely different reasons. Ferris and Northern have figured out that they're not very good, and they're trying to battle each other out for that 8th seed. It's going to go to Ferris because Northern's awful, and Minnesota State has figured it out. Like, they are just a really good hockey team that's committed to playing their systems and leaning on their stars, leaning on their good goaltending, and leaning on the things that they do well. I'm sure there's going to be a little bit of a lull for Minnesota State at some point, but Bemidji State had the same kind of lulls last year, where they drop that game to Augustana, they go to a shootout with Northern Michigan, and it's like, those aren't the results that I don't think they expected last year, but boom, they still win the McNaughton Cup. So the other 6 teams are still kind of going through that process, right? Like, what is your true identity of this team? And when I think of Bemidji State, their identity is their experience and their goaltending. They have the most forward depth, I think, in the CCHA, top to bottom. I mean, Noah Quinn, Reese Chittington, these are healthy scratches every night. Panzer, whenever he's scratched, it's a 5th-year kid who had 28 points last year for Niagara. That's a healthy scratch. So I don't think there's another team in the CCHA has that much forward depth. But Bemidji State has some pretty glaring weaknesses right now in its blue line, and especially without Vince Corcoran in the lineup. So, when you look at this Bemidji State team, they need defending out of their forwards, and they need to play a little bit more mistake-free hockey. And I think if there is the area of question in terms of identity to Bemidji State right now, that you can see it on special teams, because the power play it looked a little bit better last night. Penalty kill got better as the game went on, but those numbers tanked in December. I mean, they built up those numbers pretty well in November, but they really, really tanked in December. And playing against Michigan Tech and Lake State will do that. When Lake State has one of the best penalty kills in the country, Michigan Tech, when they can just put all those forwards out on the ice at one time and you're down a guy, it's tough to defend. So, but like Ian said, you're going into a month of January where, if you're going to make a run and if you're going to make a real push, I know going to Northern has kind of been a tough thing to do for Bemidji State in recent years, take out last year, right? But that trip to Northern, that trip to Marquette hasn't been fun. And, the trip to Bowling Green isn't necessarily a trip everybody wants to make, but you're not in a position right now to start saying, well, we'll just take our 3 points and go. You kind of need to make up some ground here. And this is the month to do it.
Yeah, I actually think I'm not that scared of the Northern trip. Historically,
they're so bad.
Yeah, I mean, you're scared because what are the Minnesota fans putting on Twitter right now? It's Mercyhurst has nothing at stake. They have nothing to fear against the Gophers. They're 64th in the pairwise. All that could happen is that we get embarrassed. So that's what happens going to Northern. But I mean, compared to the other teams in the state of Michigan in the CCHA, I mean, they're pretty tame when it comes to Bemidji State's record over the last 8 years, I guess. But yeah, let's talk a little bit about individual players that have caught your eye over the first half of the season here. Has there been anybody that's stood out to you?
Riley Funk.
Yes.
I don't know if there's a player I've enjoyed watching at any level more than Riley Funk. How did Northern Michigan not find a way to use this guy like every single game? Because I don't know. I don't get it. I don't get it. This kid is a freak. He's 6'2", 225. He skates like he's 5'9". He has strength like he's 6'5". He has way more offensive upside than I think people understand. And he's just smart. Like, he's just a smart player. And you watch him operate. Like, I encourage every single fan listening to this, the next time you watch Bemidji State play, just watch Riley Funk for one shift. Just don't look at anybody else on the ice. Just whenever 26 comes on the ice, watch him move for those 30 to 60 seconds and see the things that he does that go unnoticed. Because, I think we're talking about Bemidji State in a much different light right now if they didn't pick up Riley Funk in the middle of July. And that goes beyond the points that he's had. He's a morale guy too. And Sarah Torrey said it last night. This is the heartbeat of our team. We're talking about a guy that transferred in a month before they reported to the team. And he's being called the heartbeat of the team. It wouldn't shock me if he gets an alternate captain next year. I think there's obviously I think Jopi could still come back because he had a medical red shirt and I think a COVID year too. So he could still come back. And then Flamang, he's probably up there to get one. Irie, right? Like, there's a lot of guys that are going to kind of be looked at to maybe pick up a letter next year. But Jackson Judding is wearing a C right now, and he transferred in after 2 years. And so they're not really afraid to give that label to someone. I think it could be Riley Funk. Another guy, obviously, Issa Perrick. He's been just masterful on the power play at times. And he's really grown into those roles of kind of filling the pole cam shoes, the loaf shoes, whatever shoes you want to call it, as the kind of offensive driver on the blue line. Vince Corcoran has been playing better up until he got hurt, and it's a big bummer that he got hurt and he's going to be out for a while. But if outside of Riley Funk, if there's one player right now where I think they're playing the best hockey I've seen him play in 2 years, it's Mitch Wolf, because Mitch Wolf has been lights out. If he is one of the few players that you can earnestly say that for in December, where every single time he stepped on the ice, it's been you've been getting his best. And you saw it last night. He looks like that true two-way defenseman that we saw at the end of last year when they went on that big win streak. And if he keeps playing like this, they are going to, he's going to be a handful for a lot of CCHA teams to play against. And I've been more impressed with Patrick Satisari, kind of filling in some of those shoes too. McCauley had a good game last night. I think on the forward side of things, if you're looking for other forwards to pick up, Noah Quinn in the times that he's played, he's looked pretty good. Austin Jopi, right? He's never going to be the guy that's going to be a point every other game, but he does, he's the workhorse. He's in the right spots at the right time. He plays smart, got rewarded for it last night. So maybe he catches fire. And obviously a guy like Kirkland Irie, right? He's their leading scorer. He's caught fire after he got demoted to the extra skater against Minnesota. So, but when you look at kind of the guys that need to step up too, it just comes down to maybe seeing one go in. Casper Magnuson, right? Like, he just can't buy a goal right now. But it feels like once he gets one, they're going to start pouring in. I think Jackson Judding probably wants to be a little bit more productive tangibly offensively. So, it's not to say that he's had a bad year at all. I think he's had a pretty solid year. But, when you look at the kind of run that he went on after he came back from his injury last year, I think he wants to have a few more points and be producing a little bit more offensively. Yuri Vaisanen's cooled down a little bit. Adam Flamang hasn't quite found the pace he was playing at last year. So there's a lot of room for growth, especially on the forward side. But when you have that much depth and that many guys pushing each other, I truly do feel like it'll iron itself out. And, sooner rather than later too.
I have a quick comp because you brought up how Riley Funk skates that well for a guy that size. For Beaver fans, Connor Carver, the backup quarterback that they put in to run the ball quite a bit. I was talking to CJ during that Mankato game, especially. He's 6'3", 215. That's the size of a big body receiver.
Yeah.
He runs with the elusiveness of a tailback and with the physicality of Tony Gonzalez at tight end. Like, you can't get this guy on the ground, and it's incredible. I've never seen anybody that's 6'3" run the ball like that fluidly in my life. And it is how Riley Funk skates. You're surprised to see a guy that tall look that good.
Yeah. No, you're right. Riley Funk is like, it's so weird because you watch him, you just look at him, right? You look at him in warmups and you're like, okay, that guy serves like one or two purposes, and it's physicality and just being a big body in the dirty areas. Then you watch him play.
Jay Dickman earlier. He was on the team that won the McNaughton Cup. That's basically what he does. And you look at Riley Funk and you think, all right, that's the new Jay Dickman, and Riley Funk's out there skating laps around.
Say that there isn't a purpose for that either, right? Like that, there's a role for that on every single team in the country. You can use a guy like that that's willing to go into a corner, win a puck battle, and set up a more talented guy to go actually produce, right?
Yes.
Like there's nothing wrong with that. You can make a lot of money in hockey if you can master that role. But then you watch him play, and he's kind of like a Swiss Army knife, right? Like, oh, you need him to go win a puck race for a breakaway. Oh, Riley Funk can go do that. Oh, you need him to take a shot and beat a goalie one-on-one and from the slot. Oh, he can do that too. On top of everything he can do offensively, physically, defensively, he's an unbelievable player. And again, I don't know how Northern Michigan couldn't have found a way to use him last. And that's not to say that like that's why he transferred. He was part of the transfer wave after Patolny left too. So he was probably fine sticking around Northern for another year until Patolny left. But even then, last year he didn't play every game. So I don't know why they couldn't find a way to use him. But hey, I don't think Sartori's too upset that they couldn't.
Yeah, and we talk a lot about you were mentioning, kind of with what this team can do and what this team kind of going through the rest of the year. And obviously last year's team was a team that caught fire in the second half. These are different teams from this year and last year. So it's not a one-to-one comparison. But what did last year's team do to catch fire and get things going that you can see this year's team replicating?
They did a better job of building off of their wins. Obviously, no duh, they didn't lose for 11 straight games, right? But in that unbeaten streak, there were times where they could have taken like an actual step back, right? Losing to Augustana could have maybe, I don't want to say derail because that's a little bit too dramatic, but it could have been take a couple steps back. I mean, they lost that game 6-1, 5-1. I mean, it was after a night where they allowed 10 shots on goal. I mean, it was the most dramatic night-to-night turnaround I think you could find in just terms of the two teams just completely dominating one side of each game. Going to shootout with Northern Michigan last year, blowing the game in regulation against St. Thomas, where I think Scholl maybe not tried to go for a goalie goal, right? Like they had moments where it could have maybe spiraled out just a little bit. But they always found a way to kind of revert back to that identity and kind of build off of what they had already accomplished. And I don't see that as like a thing that they couldn't do again this year because they brought back 18 guys from last year's team. The entire core of this team has tasted the success of holding a trophy. They've felt what it's like, a lot of them, to lose a Mason Cup championship game twice. And so I think when you have kind of those experiences, it makes it easier to pull that out of you when you can build off of what you did the night before or the weekend before. It's tough for a lot of college hockey fans to consider the whole season into one perspective, right? Because you lose a game like you did against Michigan Tech, you're mad. You don't like losing those embarrassing games, and that was an embarrassing loss. I mean, we couldn't even find the last time they gave up 6 goals in a period. Like that's how bad of a loss it was. And but it doesn't take away what they've accomplished this year already in beating Minnesota, beating North Dakota, beating Duluth, taking 5 from St. Thomas, right? Like, it doesn't take away from that either. And whatever they do in the second half doesn't take away from what they've done in the first half too. So it's all about perspective. And in a weird way, I think players are at least this group of players is really, really good at keeping things in perspective. Yeah, they'd like to win every game. Like Jopi said it last night. He's like, yeah, it was pretty cool to score against my hometown team, but obviously I'd like to win every game. He followed up that answer by saying, like, yeah, we played better in the third period. Like, this makes me hungry to go out there and play Bowling Green in a couple weeks. And, obviously exhibition against Manitoba on Friday. I mean, who cares? So, I think when you get into this second half sprint, like Sartori calls it, it's easier to kind of manage that perspective too. And when you have a group of players with this much experience of playing in the CCHA, I think it makes it just a little bit easier to do that. That being said, to repeat as McNaughton Cup champions, now they need help because somebody's going to have to derail Minnesota State. I mean, they're going to have to really go through a slide here. Even if Minnesota State does it, you still have 5 other teams in front of you or 4 other teams in front of you that are going to have to take steps back as well. So, while the prospect of having home ice all the way through and the Mason Cup being back in Bemidji is probably a little bleak, it wouldn't shock me at all to see this group kind of go on a similar second half run. Maybe not 11 unbeaten in a row again. Like, that's a little dramatic, but putting together 3 straight 5+ point weekends, it's not, that wouldn't shock me one bit. And if you're, if the response to that is, well, their power play isn't good enough, they're not good enough on faceoffs, they're not good enough on penalty kill. They were worse at all of those things last year. I mean, they were so much worse at those things last year. If this team doesn't get on that kind of run this year, I think you're going to be able to point to the blue line and maybe just some of the lack of depth and experience they have on the blue line. But, if you still have guys chipping in like Sadasari and McCauley have done since Corcoran went down, I think they're going to be all right. And I'd be pretty surprised if this team does not get home ice. I think there's too much talent in the room for them to do for them to miss out on that opportunity. And but they're going to still need some help, right? Like you're going to need help along the way to get there. But at the same time, they also got a little bit of help last year too with that entire first half, right? Like, in not even in the games that they weren't playing in. I mean, Michigan Tech had a 4-0 lead with 23 minutes left against Bemidji State last year, and they lost that game in regulation. Minnesota State scored 5 times in the first period at home against Bemidji State last year, and they lost that game in regulation. Like, those are big, big, big point swings last year where they got help. And, those 2 teams, right? A team that went to the NCAA tournament and the team that they had to play to, eventually get there. Those were good hockey teams last year that gave Bemidji State a gift in the form of blowing multiple goal leads. So, outside of Minnesota State, everybody's going to need some help to get to the NCAA tournament. So yeah, it'll be fun to see it unfold. But a different year in the CCHA than last year for sure. It does feel like the collection of teams is a little bit better.
It's kind of like the Minnesota, to make a cross-sport example, Minnesota Twins, 2023, yep. They win a division that's awful and they cruise into the playoffs. They win a playoff series, whatever. The division was so bad around them. They had it clinched up by September. The Twins, I can't remember what they actually finished with, but I believe they finished with roughly the same record, if not more wins than the year before. And they finished 4th place in the division and missed the playoffs. Yep. So like the competition around you does affect kind of how you view things. Cause a year ago, it's like out of all that, you're still in first place and you can just kind of roll and it affords you that flexibility. Whereas, this year it's just so tough around you to where, me and Ian talked about this a couple of weeks ago, is the goal almost has shifted now from, okay, McNaughton Cup would be nice, but at this point, just hang on and get a top 4 seed going into the playoffs. And that's probably the most realistic situation for this team.
Yeah. I think finishing in second place is a really, really good thing to strive for right now. Like, right, if you're in second, then how far out are you first, right? Like that's the devil's advocate retort. But I think there's a pretty clear gap between first and second, and no matter who's going to sit in second place, 3 weeks from now and 3 weeks from that too, there's always going to be that little bit of a gap there. And this isn't to say that Minnesota State is like an unbeatable force at the top of the I mean, we've seen 10 different iterations of better Minnesota State teams, right? Like it's not that they're a juggernaut, but when you have a good team playing with that much momentum and that much confidence week in and week out, you think about what it does for individual players. And speaking of which, like Alex Tracy having a 9.4 save percentage, is he really a 9.4 save percentage goalie at the end of the day? Maybe, maybe not, but that's what he is this year. And it's easier to sustain that if you're playing with a bunch of confident guys in front of you. So it's going to take something to derail that confidence, which closes that gap between first and second place. But second place gets you 2 home playoff series. And we saw what this team can do at home last year. They're a good team at home. They beat North Dakota at home, Minnesota at home this year, 5 points against St. Thomas at home this year. So, I think if you're in second place, you drop down to third, whatever. If you're in that range, you have as good a shot as any to win the Mason Cup and go back to the tournament. And that's where I think if it's a tangible goal and you can kind of see that NCAA tournament light at the end of the tunnel, that helps a group like Bemidji State maybe more than it does a Lake State team, because Lake State is a little bit more inexperienced. They have a little bit more youth on that team, whereas Bemidji State, it's a bunch of weathered old men who have lost that game. And I think the thought of losing that game for a third time starts to kind of age you even a little bit more, and maybe just gets a little bit more audio, one more stride on that skate, one more inch when you reach out for that loose puck, right? Like that starts to creep into your mind, whether it's consciously or subconsciously. So if they're in that position come the end of the season, I think they're in pretty good shape, but obviously a lot of work to do to get there over the next 2 months.
Yeah. I mean, and the beauty of the way they formatted the conference tournament now is that honestly, the first round might be the most important to get home ice for. I do think that they could realistically get up to the 2 seed, and like you said, Jared, if they get some help, they could still win it. If they get a little hot here in the second half, but if you win that first series, it's winner take all in that second game. And I think that this Bemidji State team, as inconsistent as they've been this year, can put together one game to beat a team, even if it's a little bit of an upset. I mean, they've beaten, like you said, Minnesota and North Dakota, and it's a lot easier to do that at home. So trying to climb that ladder as much as you can, even getting to the 3 seed, if the 2 seed gets upset, guess who hosts in the second round? That's you. If the 1 seed gets upset and you're the 2 seed, you could host all 3 weekends yet again. And so, of course, we're projecting down the road here. We still got to focus on getting as many points as we can from these weekends coming out of Christmas break here. But I do think that this team is in a pretty good position. Last year, I think you saw it come together a little bit more because they had the World Junior players and the injured players all kind of seemed to come back all at once and make this perfect. All right, cool. Now we've got a healthy team and we're going to make a run. You don't have that one thing that you're pointing out. I mean, yeah, Vince Corcoran's out, but other than that, I mean, not a ton of injury outside of Funk missing, one weekend.
One
right?
weekend. Yeah.
And so it's like, you don't see what you're waiting for to make the run other than maybe the schedule lining up and getting a little rest here. And hopefully the team can just, all right, we unpackaged here over the last 3 weeks with only one game and an exhibition in there, and now we're ready to go. We've recharged for the second half.
Yeah, I agree with you on the, there's nothing coming down the pipe for them in terms of, reinforcements. But in some respects, I also disagree, right? Because Casper Magnuson still does not have a goal. Yeah. Adam Fleming has been absent for half the season offensively. Kirkland Irie was absent for the first half of the season offensively. Now he's picked it up again. But you have guys like that who have yet to fully hit their stride. And let's say they go out to Bowling Green, Magnuson and Fleming score in the first period. Those are goals they weren't getting for the first half of the season. And maybe in some respects, it's the reinforcements are here on this team, which is the worst thing you can say to a Twins fan of oh, our best trade acquisition is in-house, right? I hate that line of thinking. But in college hockey, it's a little bit different because there's nothing to really do to change what you have once you get past Christmas. Obviously, you can add a player from juniors for the second semester kind of thing, right? Like Michigan Tech just did it with a goalie. But what you have is what you got. for the most part. So if you start getting that level of play and that level of production out of the players you already have in house, it's more like, okay, yes, we start to see it turning for these 4, 5, 6 guys. Now we can really start to get rolling, and because you can, they've proven they can even win when they're not getting that play. But when you start getting that play and you're already winning a little bit, it's like now that's like kind of the snowball thing that they got last year, where it's like, well, hey, we're putting together a few wins here. Oh, now we get Loaf back, and we get Polkamp back, we get Scholl back, Jutting back, Magnuson back. It all starts snowballing. Like, it's kind of a similar feeling, and so yeah, it's like it's a double-edged sword in a lot of ways too.
Well, those two guys, by the way, are two guys that you could really use, not only in terms of goal scoring, which has been lacking, only one goal between the two of them, but they are two of the bigger energy guys on the team. I mean, in terms of chippiness and just the ability to inject some life into a roster mid-game with whether it be a goal celebration or a good hit. Two guys that you could really use to get back on track in the second half.
Yeah, and I'm using those as examples, right? Because I think we could see more out of Eric Martin, Yuri, Jackson Johnny, right? There's a bunch of different guys, but you're right. Like, when Casper Magnuson scores a goal, everybody knows about it because he's going to do some crazy celebration on top of it, right? Like, Adam Fleming, I know, is one of the more kind of beloved guys in that locker room. Like, not that they don't love all those guys in that locker room, but he's one of those guys when I think he speaks, they kind of listen a little bit too. So, you're all right. It's when guys like that score and start being kind of that game in, game out factor, it changes things a little bit more so than maybe some other guys, maybe some younger guys that haven't had that presence, fully established in that locker room yet. But I think the other thing too, that, when we talk about how the schedule kind of favors Bemidji State here in the next month and the teams they play, all being those bottom 4 teams, there is one aspect where the schedule really did not favor them in the second half, and that's once again drawing Minnesota State in the last weekend. Because if you're looking for somebody to derail Minnesota State, why you kind of want to be the one to do it, because not only are you knocking them down a peg, but you're putting yourself up a few pegs as well. And maybe it just takes a weekend where they get swept at home by a team they didn't expect to get swept at home by. Now they start to unravel just a little bit. They start giving out some points here and there. Now you're right back in the thick of it, and there's that parity that everybody was kind of expecting at the beginning of the year. So drawing Minnesota State at the regular season finale feels like, yeah, they could be in second place, but also have zero chance of winning the McNaughton Cup too. But there's no really way to derail them going into the Mason Cup. So, and two, St. Thomas still kind of feels like a sleeping giant. They still have the talent on that team. All of their problems are self-inflicted. Like, Jake Seibel didn't have a win until December of this season. So, like, they take a 5-minute major every single game. So maybe they're like, hey, yeah, over Christmas, we figured out how to stop shooting ourselves in the foot. That's a much tougher series than it would have been at the beginning of the season. So it's a month. January is a month where they should gain a lot of ground in the standings, but I would be wary of teams like Bowling Green and St. Thomas, especially with those games coming on the road. And with the St. Thomas series too, it's a weird one. It's Saturday, Sunday. It's not a Friday, Saturday series. So
why can we never play a regular series against Bowling Green? That part I just want to.
No, that's St. Thomas. Bowling Green
St. Thomas. Sorry. Yeah. Never mind. But still, St. Thomas.
That's Hockey Day, Minnesota. That's a fun week.
Oh, is that?
Yeah, I don't know. I think that was a coincidence. Like, I don't know why they're doing it. Because Bemidji State women's team will play Hockey Day at like 11 a.m. It's like, oh, did they do that like in conjunction with like the men's team playing Saturday, Sunday? And they're like, no, it was just like a weird. Maybe there's like a high school game because they share the rink with St. Thomas Academy Friday night.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, maybe there's something. That's probably it. Hey, look at it. The men's team can go support the women's team, I guess. Like, that's just the coincidence you get out of it. But yeah, it's
I don't think Sarah Torrey's going to bus his players over to Shakopee at 11 a.m. to sit in the cold before a really important game.
Here's hoping.
Probably not.
Here's
but I'll be there. So
it can't be as cold as it was Hockey Day, Minnesota and Bemidji. We were so excited to get a hockey day. We talked about it when we had our radio show. The day came, and in typical Bemidji fashion, it was -30 with wind chill.
Yeah.
It was like, it's like when the Super Bowl came to Minnesota. It was so cold that even though the event ran fine, they're just like, we're not bringing this back here.
No. Yeah.
You had your fun. See you in 20 years. Like,
yeah. And it's like there's a lot of places that are on the list to get one before Bemidji gets one again. So that's kind of the bummer, but there is rumors that it could end up back in the northern-ish Minnesota area after next year. It's in Hastings and maybe a lakes area of some sort. That it could be going to that might have a speedway in 2026 and maybe maybe like I don't know, just thinking with my brain here,
like an international speedway, you could say.
Like the one where they put it on ESPN2 for the for the drag races.
Yeah.
That's the rumor anyway. And so maybe
I thought you were talking about a gas station.
You basically are. You basically are talking about a gas station. But maybe 2026.
That gas station gets really busy, by the way, during that time.
2026, maybe Bemidji State and Duluth play a hockey day game there or something. I don't know.
Just throwing it out.
Yeah, it'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I if that's the case, maybe we can make it. Maybe we can make it.
Yeah.
That would be you started going with Lakes area and Speedway, and then I was like, well, there's a couple different places. So
that was really not helpful of like a not so subtle hint because it ended up being pretty subtle.
I think the general people will get it. I think it'll get to who it gets to, but I think if you really want to like split hairs, there's somebody who's like, it could be. So, Jared, great to have you on as always. Where can people check out the good work that you and Alex are cutting up over at the Bemidji Pioneer Sports section?
Yeah, BemidjiPioneer.com. A lot of fun stuff ahead of us. I pumped out a bunch of pretty cool features this past, couple of weeks. I did a whole one-on-one with Amber Fricklin, kind of her path to the Team USA bench for the U18s. That was awesome. Did a whole sit down with Matthias Scholl. That was really fun. He's outstanding kid, and he's got a really, really cool story of how he got to Bemidji State. And shout out to him for playing his 100th game last night after only having one Division I offer. So, really, really cool for him. We did Sports Person of the Year, Kyle Fodness, another outstanding one-on-one interview with him. So, and we got some fun stuff coming up. A lot of games. It's a busy month. January is where it really kind of picks up again. So we'll be at everything. Stop by and say hi, all that fun stuff. So yeah, it's a lot of fun stuff.
All right, Jared, great to have you back on, and we'll catch you on the podcast next time. All right.
Thank you.
All right. Once again, props to Jared for joining the podcast. Always great to have him on and get to talk BSU hockey since he's at the games. He gets to be there. He gets to do all the stuff. It's cool. We appreciate him coming on and doing stuff like that. We got a little bit of time here to wrap up because there's more than just hockey going on, Ian. We just can't stop talking about football. We're into 2020. Who would have thought, Ian, that we are into the calendar year of 2025 and every single show, we've talked football at some point.
You have to.
You have to. When things are rolling the way they are. So there's some breaking news at home for Bemidji State, and then some breaking news, ramifications, playoffs, big news. Let's start locally. Friend of the podcast, Jordan Hine, is coming back.
He's back home.
He's back home to be the offensive coordinator. Offensive coordinator Carson Pike announced that he is stepping down to pursue other stuff. We wish him the best. Obviously, that dude has been part of a lot of success. And like Bemidji State wouldn't be where they would be without him. Obviously, we've had players on here, we've had coaches who've talked about him and the stuff he's done. And that goes without saying. Like that, if he ever wants to come on the podcast, we'd love to talk about his time at Bemidji State and like what he's doing next. So, hey man, if you're listening, like hop on. We'd love to have you on the podcast. But Jordan coming back is huge. And when they said he stepped down, I thought about jokingly mentioning like, oh, is it time to bring Hine back or something like that? But I was like, Yeah, you don't want to like wish cast. You know what I mean? You don't want to like go out there. And then, instantly it's hey, he's coming back. He's going to be the offensive coordinator next year. I was like, all right, let's do that. So that's exciting news. What were your kind of reactions on Pike stepping down and then Hind coming in?
Yeah, it was a little bit of a instant kind of, I'm not going to say panic because it wasn't panic, but you lose an offensive coordinator that's that tenured and that
coming
has been
off
around
the best
for so
season
long.
run in school history.
Exactly. It's like, okay, well, yeah, good luck to him. And it's like, we're not holding anything against him in this instance, but it's like, oh, dang, man, what are we going to do now? Like we just got all this momentum. And then Jordan Hine steps in, what is it? A couple hours later? Was it the next day? I can't remember exactly. It was like 2 weeks ago at this point, but yeah, Jordan Hine coming back is awesome because I think you saw over the last 5 weeks of the season exactly how Northern turned their season around and was able to be a little bit more dynamic offensively. And it kind of started a week or so before that Bemidji State game where they upset Bemidji State. And of course that wasn't a dynamic offensive performance from Northern necessarily with only 14 points. But I think that Hine is a guy that's been around this program forever at this point, and I'm super excited to see what he can do, stepping into a bigger role with Northern State for a year, spreading his wings, being an offensive coordinator somewhere else. And then now he's got the opportunity to come back and coach here at his alma mater again. So super happy to have Jordan back. It was awesome having him on the coaching staff before, and I'm sure we'll have him on the podcast at some point here in the future, whether it's sometime this, winter to talk about what his decision was like coming back, or whether it's, next summer or fall to talk a little football for next season.
Yeah, exactly. And, it's just it's a cool story. So obviously if he wants to come back and come on the podcast, that we got a spot open for anybody, honestly, anybody that's had some connections with the football team or any team at Bemidji State. Don't be afraid to reach out to us on the Beaver Banter socials, Twitter, X, YouTube, Facebook, the Discord could do, wherever you can, man. Like we will take you on. It's fun to have guests of it. Like Jared and some of the other guys are awesome too. It's really fun. So there's that. Also, another football news. There is another thing too, by the way. Mentioned Marcus Hansen entered the transfer portal, and we are kind of wondering where his next move would be. And, we wondered, is it an FCS play? Is he trying to see if he can get up to that D1 level? And he made his decision. Ian, where'd he go?
He ended up at Harding University, which is another Division II school, another kind of powerhouse. They're usually in, I can't remember what conference they're in right now, but they're usually in the tournament. They're usually a pretty high seed in the tournament. So, from a fan perspective, it is a little disappointing. You can't lie, seeing one of your best players transfer and go to another Division II school. But like we said, and we haven't talked to Marcus about what his decision was and what that is. And I don't know if I plan to reach out to him and try to pester him and be like, hey, are you going to give me a straight shot answer so that I can use it on my podcast? Because even if his decision was like, oh yeah, the locker room stunk or something, and I didn't want to play at Bemidji State anymore, A, I don't think he would tell me that. And B, I don't think he would want to tell me that, even if it was the truth. So we're not going to reach out to him and pester him for answers with that. But like we talked about a couple of weeks ago, CJ, he's a guy that pursues more than just football. And that very well could be what this is about as well. So you never know. We just wish Marcus the best of luck because he gave Bemidji State a couple of hell of a good years here at the defensive line.
Right. Exactly. We talked a lot about that and everything going on and kind of our reactions and what Marcus meant to the program and stuff like that. We talked about that in the last episode, so go check that out wherever you get your podcast. But we gotta talk basketball quick. So let's get this last football thing out of the way. Ian, there's some realignment coming with the playoffs, and it's not necessarily in the favor of the NSIC teams.
Yeah, and you never know, right? Because things can change over time. Programs fall, programs rise. But yeah, there's been some realignment for the NCAA tournament. It's for getting a little bit more, for the football playoffs, I should say. Yeah, Division II football playoffs. They're reseeding the super regions. So the NSIC is now with the GMAC, the GLIAC, and the Great Lakes Valley Conference. The GLIAC being the biggest notable name there, right, with Grand Valley State and national champion Ferris State back to back. National. I mean, they've won several of them over the last few years. I can't remember exactly.
I believe the school Marcus transferred to had won one recently too.
Harding might have too. Yeah. So
they're either way.
But Ferris is up there. They're one of the best programs. They won it this year. It's going to be difficult, but hey, it's not like we haven't had Angelo State be at the peak of its powers before. And Colorado School of Mines for the last couple of years, minus this year, has been that team as well. So it'll be interesting now seeing some new teams in the super region moving forward. 4 conference champions per region will get automatic bids to the playoffs. I don't know if they're going to do it like D1. That's something we'll have to dive into more, where if we win the NSIC, do we get a home playoff game? We've got to figure more out, and we don't have a ton of time to break all of it down right now. But yeah, just keep your eyes on that, as it will, of course, be going into effect, I believe, next season. So yeah, it's interesting to say.
We'll have time to fully break it down next week when we kind of have a little bit more time throughout our show. But yeah, I mean, it's huge, and it sends ramifications throughout. Instead of going south, playing all those Texas teams, going out west to Colorado, you're now shifting east, kind of in that obviously Great Lakes region, and moving things that way. So we'll see how things
will be a lot easier though. Most of when I saw the regional map, it's a lot of Michigan, Ohio, Wisconsin, Iowa. Right. So it will be a little easier to travel, rather than going to Colorado or Washington or Texas. But it won't be as warm when you travel for those games to go to Texas now. But yeah, we got to talk some basketball.
Right. And some big stuff, by the way, for Bemidji State men's basketball. Getting Sutherland back obviously was huge for that men's basketball team. I believe he came back in the St. Cloud State game, or was that in the UMary game? That was his first game back.
I believe the St. Cloud State game. I can check the box.
They lost to a good St. Cloud State team. They lost 88-75. And then you get a win over a Mary team 72-70, and just feels like it kind of lifts the spirits up a little bit there. They got games this weekend against Wayne State and Augustana. Those are home. Historically, those are 2 tougher teams to get wins against this year, a little bit different. So hopefully this is a get right weekend, because you got to go to Mankato and Winona the next week, and that's not going to be easy. So if you can get some success this weekend and get the ball rolling, I think you can compete the next weekend. So it feels like coming together full strength, and like what hockey did a year ago, getting full strength going into the new year, was able to plow through. And I think the same thing can happen for this men's basketball team at Bemidji State. So here's hoping for them this weekend.
Yep. Sutherland did come back for both games over this, couple weekends ago at this point. But yeah, good to have him back. Hopefully now he can practice a lot more with the team and get into a swing of things for the game reps too are going to be huge, but he hasn't had much of those since the 21st. So we'll see. Coming out of the break, of course, hopefully they can make a run coming down the back stretch of the season. And then women's basketball, CJ, actually picked up their first NSIC win of the year, 78-74 victory over St. Cloud State. That's awesome to see. You had 2 players score over 20 points in that game, with Tyrion Plash and Rachel Koenig. 22 and 20.
I just want to make them co-Beaver Banter Players of the Week, by the way.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, of course, it was a couple of weeks ago, but we haven't had a show since then, so we'll give them the honor for that.
First to 2025. Congratulations.
First to 2025. They have the same schedule coming up. Wayne State and Augustana. They did drop their second game against University of Mary, so flip-flopped with the men's team in terms of results there. But 1-1 over the weekend for a women's basketball team that's kind of looking to just get wins wherever you can take them at this point. That's a good start to the 2024 side of the schedule. Hopefully it carries into 25.
And for men's and women's basketball too, this is where, we talked about it with hockey a lot with Jared earlier in the episode, but this is the grind now. This is the, you get early in the season, you go to a tournament, you play your non-conference, you just start to play your conference, then you take a break. Now is where you go. It's every weekend, Saturday or Friday, Saturday, you're playing games, you're in a rhythm, it's all NSIC, you're into that routine, and this is the meat and potatoes where we truly learn what these teams are. So that's going to be the fun part, and here we go. Things start up Friday, Saturday across Beaver Sports. So let's go. Let's go. This is going to be exciting. Ian, we're back in 2025. Let's do this thing. A whole bunch of Beaver Sports to talk about. So until next time, I'm CJ Baumgartner. There's Ian Rivers. We'll catch you later.